Okay, let's dive right into this. In 2007, Nokia made 4 out of every 10 mobile phones sold on planet Earth. But by 2013, that number was close to 0. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to unpack a professional business case study of how the most dominant phone company in history essentially vanished in less than 6 years. We're calling this the empire that couldn't see its own fire. If you study business, strategy, or technology, this is absolutely the ultimate cautionary tale.
To really understand the fall, you have to understand the sheer height of their success. $250 billion. That was Nokia's peak market value, right around the year 2000. They were one of the most valuable companies in all of Europe. They weren't just participating in the mobile phone industry, they literally were the mobile phone industry. Keeping that massive scale in mind is absolutely crucial, because it makes their subsequent collapse feel almost mathematically impossible.
Look at this contrast. They went from complete global dominance in 2007 to being sold off to Microsoft for parts in 2013. That's a disappearance act in under 6 years. Ultimately, it all comes down to a single strategic decision that changed absolutely everything. How does a $250 billion empire just evaporate? Let's figure it out.
Here's our syllabus for today's case study. We'll track the fall of the empire, bust a major innovation myth, look at the fatal flaw in their strategic scorecard, contrast their internal culture rot against Apple's rise, read a legendary internal memo, and finally analyze their billion-dollar mistake.
Section 1. The Fall of an Empire. Let's just remind ourselves how deeply ingrained this brand was in our everyday lives.
For well over a decade, Nokia was the undisputed global leader. Think back to the era of the Nokia 3310. You've probably seen the memes. This phone was famous for being virtually indestructible. You could drop it down a flight of concrete stairs, and it would barely have a scratch. The battery life lasted for days on end. Consumers completely loved these phones because they were incredibly simple, incredibly reliable, and just tough as nails.
Section 2. The Innovation Myth. And this brings us to the biggest misconception about Nokia's failure.
Ask yourself, did Nokia just fail to innovate? Did they get lazy in R&D? Was it just a case of an old dinosaur company lacking the technical chops to build a modern smartphone? The answer is a resounding no. And honestly, that's exactly what makes this autopsy so fascinating.
Debunking the innovation myth means looking closely at the facts. Nokia actually built working touchscreen smartphone prototypes years before the iPhone even existed. They had the tech. They had an army of top-tier engineering talent. Their software, the Symbian operating system, powered the vast majority of the world's smartphones in the mid-2000s. They saw the future coming, and technically, they were already there.
Section 3. The Wrong Scorecard. Now, what's really interesting here is the fatal flaw in Nokia's strategic thinking.
Picture this. It's January 2007. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage and pulls the very first iPhone out of his pocket. No physical keyboard, built entirely around a touchscreen. So, how did Nokia react? Inside Nokia's headquarters, executives dismissed it almost immediately. In fact, they laughed at it. To them, it looked like a weak, fragile product. They saw a toy for the wealthy. The battery life was short, the price tag was absurdly high for most people, and the physical build felt fragile compared to their indestructible hardware.
But here's the catch. Nokia was measuring the iPhone against the completely wrong scorecard. Their metrics for success were battery life, crystal clear call quality, and drop test durability. Apple wasn't competing on any of those metrics. Nokia didn't realize Apple wasn't actually trying to build a better phone. Apple was completely redefining what a phone was for. They were focused on building an app ecosystem, making things incredibly easy for developers, and providing a seamless touchscreen OS. Nokia thought they were still running a hardware race, but the finish line had just moved.
Section 4. Culture rot versus Apple's rise. Nokia was staying incredibly comfortable with their dominance, completely convinced their hardware would always win. But inside the company, things were starting to decay.
Let's look at the realities side by side. By 2010, Apple's high-end market share had exploded to an astonishing 61%. Nokia was rapidly losing its leadership position. Apple posted a massive 78% earnings growth in Q4 of 2010 alone. Meanwhile, credit agencies were issuing downgrade warnings for Nokia because they were deeply concerned about their competitiveness. But look at the customer mindset metric. That's the most damning one. Apple's pulling in this massive, vibrant developer ecosystem. Over in the UK, which was traditionally a massive Nokia stronghold, brand preference for Nokia plummeted to just 20%.
And why were they losing ground so fast?
Well, this internal quote captures the internal frustration perfectly. When talking about how fast, cheaper Chinese manufacturers were cranking out entirely new devices, one exasperated Nokia employee noted that competitors were building whole devices in the time that it takes us to polish a PowerPoint presentation. That literally says it all. It brilliantly illustrates the agonizing slowness, the complete lack of accountability, and the internal bureaucracy that had paralyzed them. They were trying to fight nimble disruptors with endless board meetings.
Section 5. The burning platform. This brings us to the emotional climax and the internal breaking point for the company.
In February 2011, Nokia's new CEO, Stephen Elop, sent a memo out to all employees. It eventually leaked to the press, and it was intense. He told a story of a man standing on an oil rig in the North Sea. Suddenly, an explosion hits. The platform catches fire. The man has a choice: stand on the platform and burn, or jump 30 meters down into freezing, dark waters. He jumped. Elop used this stark imagery to tell his employees Nokia is on a burning platform. Competitors aren't just taking market share with neat devices, they are taking it with entire ecosystems. He gave a clear-eyed diagnosis. The battle of devices had become a war of ecosystems.
And then he delivered this absolutely devastating line to his own workforce. We poured gasoline on our own burning platform. Wow, that was a profound admission that their internal attitude, their lack of cross-collaboration, and their incredibly slow delivery of innovation had fueled the fire that was consuming their market share. The leadership had finally recognized the root of their problem.
Section 6. The billion-dollar mistake. Let's move to the final act, because recognizing the problem is one thing, but choosing the right solution is a whole different ballgame. So, Nokia correctly diagnosed the ecosystem disease. But look at the decision tree they faced in 2011. Option 1. Stick with their in-house Symbian software. The reality? It was declining, clunky, and completely non-competitive in North America. Option 2. Adopt Android. Now, Android had a huge app ecosystem, but Nokian leadership was terrified they'd just become one of many generic Android manufacturers. Then there was option 3. Bet on Windows Phone. It was backed by Microsoft, offering a way to be unique, but it had virtually zero developer ecosystem. You can see the landscape here. At the time, iOS and Android were completely eating the world. Windows Phone had an almost negligible share. Yet, 2 weeks after that urgent burning platform memo, Nokia made their choice. They decided to abandon Symbian, and they chose Windows Phone. They tied their entire corporate future to a platform that developers were completely ignoring.
The consequences of this choice were genuinely tragic for the company. Nokia actually went on to build some excellent hardware. The Lumia series phones got incredibly strong reviews. The cameras were phenomenal, the designs were striking and colorful, but literally none of it mattered. Because when consumers bought the phone and turned it on, the App Store was a ghost town. No Instagram, no banking apps, no popular games. The iPhone, the phone they originally laughed at, was becoming the most profitable consumer product in human history, while Nokia's global market share completely collapsed into the single digits.
So, here is the crucial point. The core takeaway for everyone watching this explainer is right here. Ecosystems beat products. You can have the absolute best, most durable, longest-lasting piece of hardware in the world. You can have cameras that blow the competition totally out of the water. But if you are playing by the rules of an outdated game, if you lack the ecosystem of developers and applications that customers actually demand, you will lose. Nokia had the technology, they had the early prototypes, they even diagnosed the future perfectly with that burning platform memo. But when the time finally came to jump, they jumped right onto a lifeboat that had absolutely no ecosystem. They bet on a platform that made them different, but without developers, different just meant irrelevant. Nokia was the most dominant force in their industry, and they still measured their biggest threat using the wrong scorecard. So I'll leave you with this. If your industry's finish line moved today, would you even notice? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the metrics you use to measure your own success.